If you build software or lead people who do, then you're in the right place. This is Hard Calls. Real decisions, real leaders, real outcomes. Welcome to episode 1 of Hard Calls. I'm Trisha Price. I'm the Field Chief Product Officer at Pendo. I've spent my entire career building software. I started off as a software engineer, then became the Chief Product Officer at nCino, and then came to be the Chief Product Officer at Pendo. At nCino, I had the incredible opportunity to start at the company in the pretty early days and watch the company grow, lead the scale all the way through the IPO. Then I came to Pendo, where we build a platform for other product leaders. So I get to spend all of my time talking to product managers and product leaders all across the world. And in those conversations, I hear the same thing over and over again. I have to make the hard calls. I get pressure from sales. I get pressure from my customers, pressure from the board. AI is turning my roadmap upside down. And it's a hard job. It's constantly feeling squeezed from every direction. And I'm the one who's left to be accountable and drive outcomes and constantly having to make the hard calls. In this podcast, we're going to talk about frameworks, operating models, gut instincts, leadership, team dynamics, business process, all the things that you need, all the tools you need to make the hard call. This first guest is someone who's had an incredible impact on my career. They taught me about making hard product decisions, but also hard people decisions. How do you set up your team to scale? I've been in the fire with this person making hard calls for many, many years, and I know their impact on me, on this podcast, and on my career has been absolutely incredible and long-lasting. Good morning, Pierre, and welcome to the first Hard Calls podcast.
It's great to be here and good seeing you.
It's good to see you, Pierre. Just to get started this morning, could you introduce yourself a little bit and tell our listeners who you are and maybe how you and I know each other?
Yes, thanks, Trisha. I'm Pierre Naudé. I'm the executive chairman of nCino, a public company traded on NASDAQ. I was the founding CEO in 2011 of nCino and managed it until February this year when I moved to the exec chair level. I was CEO there for over 13 years. And I got to know Trisha when she joined our company. She knows the exact dates. We had a very close working relationship and had fantastic experiences together.
Thanks, Pierre. Yeah, I actually joined nCino in 2016, and we can talk a little bit more about that journey. And I was there through our IPO, which Pierre and I experienced together, and left to come to Pendo in 2021. So we'll talk more about our working relationship and experiences and successes, and maybe a couple of bumps in the road in today's podcast. And the concept behind the podcast of Hard Calls is as product leaders, as leaders of product companies like nCino, the product role's hard, right? It's always, everyone has opinions, right? The salespeople, they have opinions. Your customers have opinions. The board has opinions. The CEO has opinions. And yet at the end of the day, as the product leader, you're sort of left there to make the hard call. You're the one who's accountable in the end. And so maybe today we can kick off and start off with a hard call that each one of us had to make at nCino. So maybe kick us off. What's the hard call you can remember us having to make together?
Yes, I would say there's two main concepts when you drive a company. The first one is to understand your vision from day one. How big do you want to be? Do you want to build a little private company, sell it for 50 million, make a lot of money and go to the beach? Or do you have aspirations to be the worldwide leader in your segment? And I think that's very important because it drives down to product, what you're going to do. That actually determines, do you build a platform versus do you build a product company? So I would say strategically, that is your first big choice, both as the CEO as well as the product leader. The second one, which is actually more directly involved with product leaders, is actually scaling. So I want you to think, I know you start thinking about product choices, technology, tools, do you embrace AI? Is it in the cloud? Is it platforms? The real issue is your organization with success will grow tremendously. And how do you scale both the structure, the people management, and the ability to manage hundreds of people versus in the beginning, You're a band of brothers or sisters. You're all together. You're building this little company. You're so excited because you won your first 10 customers. Well, the same people who ran that business on day one are not the same people who's going to run it when it goes public. And I would tell you, if I come back to hard calls, some of the hardest calls is to tell those people that the scale has outgrown their ability to manage and judgment, because what we get paid for in the end is judgment, okay? And so then you have to find different positions in the company for them and bring people in that can do that scale. I think that is a critical element of management as well as product management.
Pierre, that's really helpful and brings me back to when you brought me on to nCino, right?
Exactly.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, right? We met in San Francisco in that time in 2016. And I think you were at a critical point of scale, right? We had just signed 2 very large top 20 banks in the US and had to make sure that they were successful with our product and we maintained our reputation. And I think that's part of why you brought me to nCino.
100%. I still remember where we sat in one market at a cafeteria down in the foyer, and we started talking, and one of my bank customers told you to connect with us, if you remember correctly. And we started talking, and I realized at the time that we moved from the very small startup with excitement and, 50 people in PD&E. And then I needed some scale, brought somebody else in from Salesforce, which was very successful, brought some structure, brought some more mature management, which is what we needed. But I also realized we needed domain expertise, which means banking. Do you understand banking? Do you understand credit? Do you understand how bankers think, how the credit people think, how they think about scaling, etc., and how they trust us? And I needed a higher level of energy as well. And I met you, and I immediately found that the two of us just connected from a technology perspective, a perspective on how it should work, because in the end, it's about results to the customer, okay? The second thing I saw was a tremendous leadership ability on how to drive people and energy in the same direction. Because look, especially technologists, I was a programmer, analyst, call it what you like, in my early stages of my career, and wrote code until I was 36 years old, because I loved it. I love tech. We all have opinions. Every room I always walked in, I would say to people, use an Android or an iPhone. And of course, in America, it's about 80%, iPhones versus Android. And I would tell him, which one do you like better? And of course, we all like the one we know. It's the same with technology in product. All these new things come along, but realize the bulk of your people know the older tech and they're comfortable with it. And so how do you bring them along to adapt and change and actually embrace newer technologies? That's why companies go stale. So I saw that energy in you, and we decided to bring you in. I still remember you said to me, well, I want to be a chief product officer. I said, just trust me, come along, and we find you a nice spot, and you go work there and get to know the place, and we'll do the right thing, if you recall correct.
I do. And I made a big leap of faith. I moved my family to Wilmington, North Carolina, and took a job that was by title, slightly a step below where I was coming from, but I trusted you and I trusted the vision. And I think it worked out pretty well for both of us. What do you think?
It did. But you know what? Because if you look back and you have to give somebody else advice today, you would say, why would you ever do that? Well, it gave you the foundation that you managed from later on. That early stage took the pressure off of being the lead person and immediately make some calls because you didn't know the background, didn't understand the Salesforce platform at the time, the technology platforms we were on, the people. So it gives you kind of like a protected way to come in, get to know the whole thing, knowing the bigger picture you and I were talking about. And then once you took over, you were fully prepared for it. And that was the foundation of your success. And that was the whole scaling thing.
Yeah. Pierre, let's talk about the fact that, you made me the offer. It wasn't a CPO offer that I was looking for. It was maybe technically a step down, but I've always been told if you get an offer for a seat on a rocket ship, you take it and you don't ask what seat. And maybe the particular title or the particular salary that you're getting offered in the moment is not what's critically important. And I think that really worked out for me. How do you think about that? How do you think about that as advice to our listeners?
Firstly, you have to understand the psychology of that meeting. And what the hiring person is thinking about is, I'm going to bring this person on. I've got high expectations. I'm going to promote her here shortly. I want to see the enthusiasm, the energy, and the all-in attitude. And I always remind my kids as well, go in there and pretend this is the best job you apply for ever. Until you get the offer, you can always say no. But you never go into an interview sitting there saying things like, well, I'm not so sure. That sounds to me like a lame horse. And I'll be very polite and talk to you about your interests and worry about you. When it's over, I'll tell people, go find somebody else. Because what I want is somebody who comes in and is going to be headstrong with me down this path with these audacious goals and things we dreamt up that we're going to be. And that's so important that you've got that enthusiasm and you've got that drive and you show that up front. Once you're in the boat, you've got an opinion, you can speak up, you can argue with us strategically, but that's you're in the boat. And then you help us to drive the company in the right direction.
So Pierre, from day one, you had a vision for nCino that was huge, right? It was, when there was 7 of you sitting in one conference room, there was a sign that said global leader in cloud banking, global leader in cloud banking, 7 people in Wilmington, North Carolina, right? And
yes, we actually put up a sign at the entry door of the small building that said worldwide headquarters.
Worldwide headquarters in Wilmington,
Yes.
North Carolina, with 7 people in one room. And, that fast forward, you are the global leader in cloud banking. And you never, as we talk about hard calls, there were many times people doubted us. There were many times people doubted the ability to execute on that big vision. And yet here you are, IPO, successful company, clearly leader to the cloud, now leader to AI, leader internationally as it comes to cloud banking. Like, talk about the perseverance, how we did that, what were some of the hard choices and pressures we were under to get there?
Yes. So the first thing is you have to understand scaling at that rate is chaotic. So you need people who's very adaptable, enthusiastic, and is willing to run through a wall proverbially for you. Okay. So we set up a set of values for the company to say what you hire has to fit in this box. And it's very simplistic values. And I'll urge you to go look at the nCino website and look at the set of values. English is my second language, so I used very simple terms of how to do that, okay? But one was to have fun. Because if you come into that situation and you cannot laugh at yourself and have fun, you cannot survive there. The second thing is to understand you may be reassigned to other roles of a drop of a coin because that's what it takes. You have to be flexible and just do things and rotate into different roles to grow your career, okay? The third thing to realize is lots of failures. It's not going to succeed on day one because I remember we started winning big banks, and I mean mega banks, okay? Like Truist, Bank of America, etc., in about the 2016 timeframe. And at our annual user conference in 2017, we just signed Bank of America. We've got these big banks with their own specific requirements, and they try to steer the company because they know we're a smaller company. I announced we're going to build consumer lending. And the conference I thought was going to cheer for me literally groaned and then started complaining about how could we divert resources off to that. Now realize our resources behind us, the funding people said, Pierre, you've got as much money as you need, just go as fast as you can. So we could hire at a very fast rate more people and redirect them off to consumer, which by the way in the end turned out to be an extremely difficult build. I don't think people understand the complexity behind consumer lending and banking. It's a highly regulated environment. But the point is, we took that leap of faith while keeping these customers happy and keep on growing the growth engine, which is commercial, okay? And Trisha had to endure the pain of hiring all these new people, putting teams in place at that rate. In the meantime, we try to change integrations. We try to take on different platforms because the Salesforce.com platform is great for workflow, but once you get into deep data analysis, integrations, etc., there's other tools you can use. So we had to adapt Amazon as a separate platform in the journey and then make these technologies work together at the same time. So you go to the engineering level, they're complaining. Come on, man, I just learned this tool. Now you do that. How do I make these two work together? And what you have to do is lay out the vision and the excitement that this is an opportunity. Every obstacle is an opportunity for be more successful, simplifying deep complexity, and actually doing special things. And what Trisha and the team did was always to embrace that kind of an excitement. So if you know the building, we've got a 3-story building. Engineering sit on the 2nd floor, okay? And I'm on the 3rd floor with sales and marketing and the corporate functions. And I used to love to walk down there to the 2nd floor and have fun with them and explain to them, guys, I used to be you. I wrote code. I know what I'm doing to you. But this is fun. This is the most exciting time of your life. So you can comment on that and how it worked out.
Look, it was so much fun. And if I recall, when you would come downstairs, we would call it the engine room that you would visit.
Exactly.
In the engine room.
I was just thinking of Titanic and I said, it's the engine room down there. I have to go down there, the proverbial engine room.
Because we were powering the company. We were the engine. And Pierre, you know,
totally.
It is, you brought up a couple of really fun and interesting moments. You know, 2017, when we started down the path of consumer lending, you know, that was in support of your vision from day one about being the global leader in cloud banking. You didn't say we wanted to be the global leader in commercial lending, but it was hard. You're right. And I think when we talk about hard calls and we talk about the pressure of a product leader, you know, we were still in early innings of commercial lending at that time, right? And there was still a lot of work to do. You talked about integrations. You talked about, we haven't talked about, but like our underwriting, or what bankers call our spreading technology. You know, we were in the midst of really beefing that up. We were in the midst of trying to add AI and machine learning, doing acquisitions, all at the same time to start doing consumer lending. And, you know, I think about hard calls, that was a hard call and it was hard to execute on, you know. And I think some of the mistakes, when I think about some of the mistakes I made as a product leader during that time, some of the tricks, tools that we used in commercial lending, I tried to utilize the same ideas, concepts, frameworks for consumer lending. And that's where I made mistakes and broke down. Like, you get a tool in your toolbox and you say, hey, that worked, right? Let's use it. Like commercial lending, highly configurable, can do integrations on the fly using SIs and partners. They're sort of bespoke and custom to each bank. But then you come to consumer lending and that product has to completely out of the box rip and replace existing complex systems. And I think some of the things in the early days of 2017, 18, 19 of consumer lending, when we tried to, or I tried to sort of use the winnings from commercial and apply to consumer, I think were some real lessons learned for me.
I remember it so well. I thought this morning about collateral, for instance. And to the audience, you buy a house, your house becomes the collateral to the loan. In other words, it backs up the loan. If you don't pay your loan, they're going to sell their house, take their money. Well, that's a very simplistic one-to-one relationship. If you take that same example to a complex commercial loan where the collateral could be multiple pieces of assets, you could have a board of directors who sign off on the loan, etc. All that combination is so much more. So you try to take this very complex structure and push it into a consumer loan, which only need a one-to-one relationship. And we were like, well, it's a platform, so it should use the same underpinnings. There's many of these shared components. And later on, we became smarter not to do that. And the most simple example I can give you is you can take your kids to school in a Camry, in a minivan, a school bus. All three of those are transportation mechanisms. So when I speak at the top, I said we're in transportation. You can decide to build a school bus, a minivan, or a Camry. Three very different vehicles with different levels of comfort, totally different utilities. And so you have to think up front, which is the one you want? One kid in a Camry, maybe 4 in a minivan, or 50 in a school bus. And you're going to architect different. Your safety mechanisms, your seats, your configuration, the driver comfort, everything is different.
Yeah.
And so you have to contemplate those things and don't be pedantic. Sit back and say, this is a very specialized thing. I'm going to build its own little utility. Or this is a common share component. And we were, open to make those changes. There's one other element I want to touch on, Trisha, which I know is going to be heresy in many product groups as they think about organization structures, okay?
Yeah.
And we had many, many arguments about organization structures. And I know if you read the textbooks, they will tell you in today's world, you have an engineering team and you have product. And then product ideate, and they look at the product, and then they write Jira tickets, and boom, it goes to engineers, and they get this ticket. And I used to call that's the 20-page spec. And then they read, interpret that, and they write the code. So they're somewhat removed, and you've got flexibility in resources. So I'm sure if you're from a big company, you're going to sit there thinking, yeah, but that's how it has to work because I need to flexibility in resources. I would tell you, as a guy who wrote code till I was 36 and became a CEO of a public company, it was very successful, is that I never understood that way, because what you make with me then is a code monkey. And by the way, that job I just described today can be taken over by AI immediately. The value of the engineer is actually to be a domain expert too. I could never be as big and spend all my time as the domain expert, but that's why I believed in product managers with a bunch of analysts around them, people who come from the business and who can analyze all the user requirements, all the fields, all the editing, etc. And they can write the spec, but write a 2-page spec. Sit right next to the programmers, involve them every day on what's the vision of the product, what is the use cases, and so on. Now you give them a concept and say, here's the spec detail, but let them write the code. So I'm still an advocate of smaller teams with good leaders around domain expertise. And those teams can be led by ex-engineers, ex-product people, or ex-business people.
Yeah.
But you pick the strongest leader who's got some imagination, understand where the future is going to be, understand the industry.
Yeah.
And that way, you have to break up your product into these smaller components. Your dilemma with that is, when you build an enterprise architecture like we did, is Trisha will say, well, wait a minute. Now I've got these rogue bandits running around, and then I duplicate stuff, and how do I architect? Well, this is the $100 million question. You've got architects coming across. The reason people change these org structures is actually always to fix an old problem. So we went from these smaller teams to this big construct of engineers over here, engineering managers, and product people over here. That's awesome from flexibility. The problem is the engineers are coding monkeys. And then they get moved around, and the product guy who owns the delivery date says, well, they took 3 of my people. And then they're going to move 3 different ones in here who's got no background on consumer. They come from commercial. So they kind of give me this commercial-like consumer experience. Trisha, you'll remember all this, okay? So there's no religious answer on that. But what I would tell you is, in my experience, the closer you keep and train the engineers to the business solution, the more innovation you'll get. You'll be amazed, because they know the tech so well, how these engineers, and not all of them, but I will tell you, these 10% of them wants to move into management and wants to run products. I always reminded my team, what did Steve Jobs do before he ran Apple? He wrote code. Okay?
Yeah.
What did Bill Gates do? He wrote code.
What did we do, Pierre?
What did we do? We wrote code.
Code. And
we understand it. You know, I would go to the second floor, and Trisha would laugh because I would go there and talk to the techies, and they would go, what does he know? He doesn't know this stuff. The difference was, when I did it, we literally had to manipulate the code at the memory level, at the database level, because we didn't have the resources. We didn't have the computing power today. Today, they've got the luxury of writing ineffective code. We could not do that. Yeah. So actually, we have a very deep understanding of how the processes work, how the databases work, how memory is allocated, how this thing works, how the integration. You know, I did network engineering, I did deep database engineering and design. And what that gives you is a fundamental understanding of how this is going to go. So you have to connect that technology with the people and make it interesting and make it a great place to work.
Pierre, remember we used to tell everybody all the time we had the first job out of college, which was writing COBOL on the mainframe.
Exactly. And the kids used to laugh at me until I remind them I also wrote assembler, which is actually manipulating the engine. But these are the kind of calls you have to make. And so what I'm telling you is, these are hard calls because it affects technology choices. And you make a technology decision that's wrong, a platform decision, your company will pay for it.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that, stay your course, but be willing to change when you see it doesn't work. Just like we stayed our course in the Salesforce platform, but when we realized the front-end technology needs better flexibility and quicker development, we moved that to AWS. And we integrate the two things, okay? When we realized we're going to go big into the data business, that's not a good application for the Force.com platform. So we moved that to AWS and Databricks. So those are the things you have to make. The second real emotional big decisions you're going to make in your career is actually the scaling question. When is your best buddy that started the company with you, or the person that worked 5 years with you, not ability to scale anymore? Because some people are built for these startups and that's what they like to do and they run around in chaos. When you become 2,000 people, it's a very different management structure. The management meetings are different. In the early days, I would sit around the table and ask everybody, what did you do last week? Sounds kind of like those, doesn't it? What's your 5 things you did last week? But then as you get big, your leaders start thinking strategic. They've got roadmaps that they have to report on. They've got very specific metrics. And that's how you track the business. And you talk about strategic directions, international expansion, who's going to lead it, etc. And Methuselah, you'll remember we had a very great example. Pullen Daniel, one of the founders, a great guy, best sales guy I've seen in my life. Pullen was what I would call a captain of a SWAT team. Very good at that. But the moment sales scaled to a certain thing, I needed a professional manager, somebody who can run scale.
Yeah.
And we put Josh in place.
And he was amazing.
Josh was amazing at scaling and running a very specific structured organization with best practices, databases, etc. So I moved Pullen to London to start off Europe for me because he was the SWAT team captain. Go into the wild, over the hill, capture for me as much as you can, tell me what's going on, where do we go? And then there's a certain point, Europe scaled to the point where Pullen come home and he helped me with M&A and strategy because he knows the company so well.
Pierre, I love how when you talk about hard calls and you think about it through our history from 7 people to thousands of people, you talk about it in 2 ways. You talked about technology decisions, platform decisions, like the ones we had to make with Salesforce and AWS. And then you talked about people decisions. And as a product leader, as a CEO, as a leader in general, you got to make people decisions and you got to know who are your captains of your SWAT team, who are your real leaders that can do process and drive change at scale and bring energy, as you talked about. And I think it's really interesting and fun how you talked about hard calls in both of those camps, right? The people calls and the technology calls. And we even kind of talked about them in a third way, which is more like the product strategy calls, right? Like the consumer lending, the calls that we had to make there to go into consumer lending. And I think that's great because it's easy to think about the hard calls as just the product calls or just the technology calls. But I love your focus on the people because we can't be successful leading companies through an IPO, leading companies to scale, getting products out there without the right people. And it's interesting how you talked about Pullen and Josh as 2 critically successful people nCino's success, but in wildly different ways.
Then I think a very important thing around that is because on that journey of scaling and growing your business and be successful, you will have differences. Sales always wants more, faster, etc. And it's difficult, and as a CEO, I had to make sure I keep somewhat at bay because I understand what Trisha had to do, how complex it was, how difficult it was. And sometimes I would say, guys, even though they tell you they're going to do this in 2 years, there is 0 chance they finish that product in 2 years. So don't count on it. Oh, but they said so. Is the hold them accountable? Well, we're writing code. We all know the ratio. An engineer tells you 1 month, it's actually 4 months because they forgot about testing and integration and packaging and getting what I call whole product to market.
Yeah.
Whole product includes training of the field, collateral, all the documentation, training of customers, marketing, getting sales equipped, etc. There's a massive number of things that has to happen after you've written the code.
Yeah.
So that 1 month the coder told me is actually quite irrelevant. I just use that as a proxy for how long it'll take to get the thing to market. But so you're going to have these differences, and you have to have someone in there with a firm hand. to make sure the priorities and the results stay aligned. So that's very interesting. And then the next one is to also understand as you scale and you move people around, especially when somebody had the chief product job, and then you bring somebody in over them, that there's nothing personal about it. Treat them with respect. Try to keep them in the company. You'll succeed about 50% of the time. Some of them do have an interest to stay and go do something else inside. And they get it, by the way. The people thing is too much. So here is a key little nugget on scaling. If you want to scale, and I've always said this, I can go run Apple tomorrow. Not really, you know that. But what I mean by that is, as long as I have 7 good people, if you look at your product hierarchies, every manager should have, on average, about 7 people reporting to them. Now, in less complex functions, you can make it 10, and in more complex, you probably make it 4. But 7 is your historical average. If you just focus as a leader, whether you run product, sales, customer success, if you focus on hiring the very best 7 people working for you that you know is going to take you to heaven, you will be successful. And if you're also willing to say, we can have disagreements and debates, but once we set the strategic direction, we're all going to go focus on execute. Because obviously 2 people didn't agree with you, and now they have to come and do this. Once you said, this is what we're going to do, there's no debate anymore. We're going to go execute. And we will come back and report on the results and how it worked and change course if needed, okay? The third element is, I'm looking for the right word, but let's call it no jackasses. You find this group of people in companies, and they're normally very technical and very good, who will do the silent veto. In other words, you sit in a meeting, they go, yep, got it. Then when they walk away, they go behind the scenes, and they've got a group of people they influence. They go, nah, never work. That's not the right call. We shouldn't have done that. Those people actually use as their power base a more bunch of junior people that they influence, and they second guess you all the time, okay? They are actually just a bad influence in the company. And I can tell you, we were brutal on that. If we find them out, and you do it in public, and you tell the people exactly, because normally, let's call this person John. John was very smart, brilliant, good technique, etc. But man, they're disrupting. And they, by the way, they gather information, keep it to themselves, and then they make everyone dependent on them because that's their power base, okay?
Yeah.
So those kind of people, get them out of your company. Now, there are some companies who build a whole enterprise on just people like that. It's not a place I want to work at, and I've not seen that many successful places like that. Yeah. They typically churn through people as well because it's impossible to work there. But I would tell you to identify the characteristics of the individuals you want to hire and actually make sure you stick to that. And Trisha will remember, till my very last day as the functional CEO, every new hire group, I'll go speak to them for an hour when they're coming. And I would tell them that maybe their mamas didn't tell them this, but they were selected 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000 applicants we had, and they're special. The fact that they're India, they're special. Now they have to prove to me that we were right.
Yeah. Pierre, so I have a funny thing, and then I'm going to say the 2 things that I really took away from that leadership style and things you taught me. The funny thing is you just made me laugh and think about when you said your mom, because I'll never forget that our dress code at nCino was look in the mirror and tell me, would your mom be proud if you wore that to work? And then look one more time. Just look a second time. And that was our actual dress code policy at nCino, which just...
And by the way, if they say, I think it would have been okay, I said, I want to talk to your mama. I mean, this can't
have
be
your mama
right.
call me. Have your mama call me.
Yes, exactly.
But the 2 things, I think, Pierre, for me, in terms of, I think that really helped me grow and be successful working for you at nCino and continued in my path. One was this whole product concept. I did not understand that concept before coming to work for you. And I learned it the hard way through mistakes and with you. But that whole product thing is something I've definitely taken with me at Pendo. Actually, at Pendo, we used to have scrum masters in our engineering team. And what would happen, and this will sound familiar to you, what would happen to me is people would say, yeah, it's done. Look in Jira, it's done. And I would go look in the product because I use our product daily. And I'd say, well, it's funny because I don't see it. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's because we haven't trained so and so. And so it's behind a flag and it's only rolled out to this group. And I'm like, well, then it's not done. And I learned that from you. And so I took those scrum masters and we put them into product operations, reporting into product instead of engineering. And their job as program managers became, if it is not being used by our customers, if it is not being sold by our salespeople, it is not done. And we even started measuring whole product score, and how people engage with Pendo as a product isn't just how they use it in the application, but it's, are they engaging with everything else around it in our community, right? Our thought leadership around it. And so that is something I really appreciate that I learned from you, and I think has been a big success for us at Pendo in terms of launching new products, because from day one, I put those program managers in place and measured whole products. So thank you.
Do you remember the flywheel concept we put on the board that said,
Yep.
look, and I realize I'm talking to a broad audience of people, okay, from a junior engineer all the way to a marketing specialist, a salesperson, and everyone looks through the lens of what they need. And so what I did is I created literally a visual of a toy train. And I said, all right, guys, here's the problem. It stops at the station of the engineers and it picks up the code that's completed. But sales can't use it because there's no collateral, there's no sales trading, nothing. So it has to collect requirements coming around the track from each of these people. What's it you need before you can sell this? And then it goes back into the bucket. We start building it, and different people are responsible. It could be marketing, it could be product management, it could be engineers, etc. And then finally, you start delivering it with the same trend coming around the track. And as you deliver product that's now fully baked in the whole product, you actually collect new requirements, because who speaks to customers? Well, marketing, because we do market research. Sales speaks to customer every day. Don't forget that professional services speak to them every day because they're implementing and they see all the flaws of everything, okay? How about support? Well, they take all the calls and they think, what the heck were you thinking? This thing could never work like this, okay? So you have to make sure you've got a flywheel concept or a train track that not only deliver products and training and concepts, but actually collect information from all those stakeholders.
Yep.
That's why it's so complex to build these things.
Yeah.
That's why you need methodologies and people who can work together.
Yeah, because products aren't successful because we shipped features. Products are successful when our customers get value from them, when we drive revenue from them, and they're adopted and used and loved. And so, it doesn't stop at shipping.
Whether we like it or not, and we all are proud of the products we've built, you get measured on your financial success. That is actually the little measurement on the side. I know we've got metrics and you look at this and so on. In the end, in a capitalistic society, you get measured of how many of these things did you sell, how did the customers react, and are you making money on it? And I will tell you, this whole AI revolution is going to change everything we've done. And if you're not willing to cannibalize your business and your processes by applying AI, you will be left behind.
Totally agree. And I think that's just going to make these hard calls that we've been talking about that much harder, right? Because are you focused on short term and hitting your numbers and hitting your goals? Or are you focused on reinventing yourself and long term with AI, because the whole game's about to change? So the hard calls are not going to get easier. They're going to get harder.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Pierre. I truly appreciate you spending time with me this morning, taking me down memory lane. But most of all, I appreciate your mentorship, your leadership, and helping me become the product leader and being prepared to make the hard calls that I get to make every day. So thank you.
Trisha, thanks for having me. And I have fond memories of us working together. And I always told you I was lucky to have you.
And I was lucky.
Thank you so much.
I remember you told me one time, this is a once in a career situation we're all in on this rocket ship. And you were right. And I have fond memories as well.
Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to Hard Calls, the product podcasts where we share best practices and all the things you need to succeed. If you enjoyed the show today, share it with your friends and come back for more.